we decided to hold this seminar, hopefully to encourage young people to be aware of, especially what we call communicators. We were looking for young bloggers to invite. We couldn't find bloggers to invite for this session because they're the ones who need to go out there, find the stories. I have heard from people in the last few months, agents are asking for money to send people to work in Australia, for example. So these are issues we need to look at. So let me go into the panel today. I'll introduce one by one. First speaker will be Shirley Tivao, who is a seller's advocate who has been involved in multiple high court trials and court appeal matters and Supreme Court matters during her time as a criminal prosecutor within the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, and where I understand she has also successfully prosecuted a case of domestic human trafficking in Fiji. So Shirley is currently a partner with Shirley Venina Susan Legal Partners in SWA.
Good to see everyone here in the room. Special thank you to the USB School of Journalism and UNODC for creating this platform. It's about time that people start talking about trafficking. It's here in Fiji. Just because it's not reported doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Our ignorance is working against us in terms of human trafficking. And so I'm glad to be invited to speak in this forum. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. You've made my job particularly easier because you've explained in context what human trafficking is. And so I don't really have to go into the legal side of things when doing my presentation today. So thank you for that. So I was given a 15-minute slot today, so I'll try and keep within my time slot. So very briefly, Fiji is part of the international treaty, the protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, the trafficking protocol. We are part of that, and I think we have been part of that since 2017. Our domestic laws for trafficking include the Constitution, the Crimes Act, and the Immigration Act, right? I've outlined the sections there, and there are about 35 sections of human trafficking within Fiji. It is not the easiest laws to understand in terms of human trafficking. And we've based, in the Crimes Act, we've based the Crimes Act off the New South Wales Crimes Act. And New South Wales have done away with these provisions of human trafficking for the fact that it is complicated. Within those sections, there are multiple subsections, again, defining what human trafficking is. So it is not the easiest laws to understand. But what you must understand, in a nutshell, what human trafficking is. And the protocol has outlined succinctly what human trafficking is. So Article 3 outlines what trafficking in persons is. And Ms. Miller has gone into details with this. So even though we've acceded to the treaty in 2017, or 19th of September 2017, our laws, even though we have 38 sections of human trafficking, does not outline a few of the definitions. And one of them is harboring, right? We do not have harboring within all of those human trafficking laws. So right now, one of the issues that we in Fiji face is, one, how do we incorporate human trafficking that it criminalizes all form of trafficking? And another is, how do we simplify these laws to make them understandable to everyone? No one wants to go to law school for 5 years to have to learn how to read these complicated laws. And it is a lot. But on a side note, even though our laws don't have harboring, the Office of the DPP is still able to sort of prosecute for harboring with other crimes, for example, aiding and abetting. So instead of saying that just because a person had kept a trafficked person in their house, We cannot charge for harboring, but we can charge for aiding and abetting in domestic trafficking, aiding and abetting in international trafficking. So there are ways around it, but our laws do not perfectly align with the trafficking protocol. And so that's one of the issues that we are facing and that we need to lobby as a region together. I'm going to talk about a few cases in terms of human trafficking. We've only had a handful of cases within Fiji, and perhaps talking about these cases, we can come to understand where our shortfalls lie and what we need to do. Human trafficking is here. It's been here for over a decade. Everyone has been wanting to do something in this region. Everyone has been wanting to do something in Fiji in regards to human trafficking. But as Ms. Miller said, the statistics, there's no statistics in terms of trafficking. If trafficking, how do we measure trafficking to get statistics? Do we measure it by successful prosecution? Do we measure it by people coming out to talk about human trafficking? There's many hurdles we need to get, and it looks like a monumental task. But I think small steps, as what we're doing in this room, is going to help. All right. So this is one of the first human trafficking cases in Fiji, state against Muti. And it was an Indian national that had, a Punjabi national that had brought in 7 other Punjabi nationals and informed them that there were jobs waiting for them in New Zealand. And so they had come through Nandi airport. Well, I think the immigration office was there and had questioned them in regards to why they were coming or transiting Fiji to go to New Zealand. And this is where we were able to see that this was a human trafficking case. The national was charged and he was convicted in the Fiji courts, in the High Court. So he was sentenced to 6 years with a non-parole of 4, which again, people might be thinking, why is he only sentenced for 6 years? This is human trafficking. One of the reasons why his sentence was so low is because there was, we call it culpability. So because there was not really any harm done to the national. So we had caught him in the first instance before these the Punjabi nationals could be further subject to labor abuse or abuse by any other nature for trafficking. Again, this is the only case that we've gotten which immigration has brought up. And I think this was in 2012 or 2014. From this case, there's been no other cases. And again, we need to ask, why is that? Why are there no other cases? We can do it. It has been done, but why is it not being done? Is there no person coming in, or is there something to do with the checks that are happening at the border? These are the questions we need to ask ourselves in this regard. I'm sorry, my presentation will have a lot of questions in this regard because there's so much that needs to be done in terms of this space. And again, what did we do to the Punjabi nationals other than send them back to their own country? So at that time, there was no victim support. There was no programs in terms of facilitating to support these people that have come here with nothing in the hopes of getting a job. The best we could do is turn them around and send them back to their own country. Right? And we have to remember the people that are vulnerable to human trafficking are the vulnerable people, right? Traffickers are not going to go to a rich person to try and convince them, right, to go to another country to work. They're going to convince the people that are vulnerable, the poverty-stricken people that need this, that see a better life outside of what they're living. These are the people that are targeted by human traffickers, right? Because trafficking, you don't have to say yes, right? These trafficking people use fraud, manipulation, right? They try and manipulate people to get what they want, right? Even the trafficked victims themselves, most of the time don't know they're trafficked because there's a very big misconception that I said yes to this, right? I'm suffering, but I made my bed. And there's a very big social norm discussion is you've made your bed, lay in it, right? That's your decisions that you've made. But what we fail to realize is that these decisions came about of their situation, of their economic situation, of these people tapping into the vulnerability of these victims to exploit them. This was the biggest international trafficking case that we had in Fiji, right? And unfortunately, they've walked free. So they were initially, the 4 accused persons were initially charged in the High Court for several counts of aggravated trafficking in persons. They were convicted initially. They were sentenced to, I think, Lajeni was sentenced to 10, Liambing was sentenced to 10, Zhang was sentenced to 7, and Jason Zhang was sentenced to 10 years. They appealed their decision, and the appeal was successful, and a retrial was ordered. So basically what had happened is this 4 accused persons had brought in 2 Thailand workers to work at a beauty salon, a massage parlor. What they didn't know was when they were going to work at the massage parlor, they would need to provide extra services in the form of sexual services, right? They did it for a few months, and thereafter they were found out by, I think, one of their customers that had gone and reported it, and that's when police became involved. Right? The biggest hurdles for this is that at that time, right, there were no services. Immigration did not know what to do with their visa status. There was no services in terms of where to from here. These ladies need support in terms of money. They need a place to stay. When these traffickers bring in these victims, they provide everything. They take your passport, they give you accommodation, they give you the worst wages ever, they expect you to come to work every day. That's the conditions that they lived in, but they were living, right? They were surviving. Take that away, there were no services out there at that time to cater for these victims, right? Where were they going to stay? Who was going to give them money for food? They needed to be in the country for 2 years because that's how long the case would take. So within those 2 years, I think the DPP had done a special fund to actually put them somewhere to await the case. And they had been given an allowance, food money, but it wasn't a lot, right? And then there's the language barrier. There was a language barrier with these women. It wasn't a lot of money. They were getting frustrated. At least when they were working at the massage parlor, they were still earning money. And these women were earning money to send back to their families who depended on them. And so once you cut them out, they didn't like the situation they were in, right? As soon as the criminal conviction was obtained, they were on the first flight back to Thailand. And that's it. We've never heard from them again. They were on the first flight back. When a retrial was ordered, the prosecution couldn't find them. And they had to file a nollie prosecute, and these 4 people are out, back into society. There are no services available to assist the victims. And I think now there are some services, because we've had the narrative of discussions like this, there are some services available if a victim were to find themselves in this situation. But again, what becomes of their visa? Are we able to give them asylum in our country? Right? What is their visa status if they can't, if they're here on visitor's visa and their visa has expired, they can't work, they can't get a means to provide for themselves. Again, the language barrier. One of the biggest hurdles of these trafficked people is the language barrier. Traffickers intentionally bring people that can't speak the main language in that country because you actually make a bubble for them, a bubble of manipulation. So you can't speak the main language, but you can do the work. That's all you need to do here, the work, right? They come here, they don't know the laws. So in terms of labor, they don't know what they're entitled to. The state against Inoke Rakandroka is the first domestic trafficking case for Fiji. Right, and this was basically the two accused persons were pimping two children, 17 and 15. So they'd go out to the nightclubs and sort and get men to come and sleep with these two underage girls. Sometimes they would message on the mobile and say a meeting place, and they would take a cut of the pay, and then they would give some monies to the two young girls. The two girls didn't know they were being trafficked, and they were doing that for the longest time, right? And again, they didn't use the same manipulation that they did with the Jason Zong case. But what these two did was that they provided these two girls, with everything. Like these two underage girls were walking around with hundreds of dollars in their wallets. They were bought like the latest fashion clothes, makeup, lipstick. They were being kept like that. And so they didn't think there was anything wrong with them until I think police raided one of the nightclubs and started questioning the girls because they were obviously underage. But that's where they would get their clients from the nightclub. They would all go out clubbing. And these two accused persons would sort of set up plans with the older men to sleep with these two girls. It is happening more often than not, right? But after this case, there's never been another case like this. Right? It is happening often than not, and we haven't left square one of where we were from 2000, and this case was 2017. Mr. Inoki was sentenced to 16 and Mohammed was sentenced to 12 years, where they still are in prison. This case has not been overturned by the Court of Appeal. Right? So I would call this a successful case. The last case of domestic trafficking that we've had was 2017, State against Josephatha Werelangi. And this is the case that I had prosecuted in my time at the DPP's office. So the accused was charged for 1 count of aggravated sexual servitude and 3 counts of domestic trafficking in persons. So what had happened was that the victim knew the accused. The accused was a transgender prostitute. So he was in no sorry. The victim knew the accused because the victim's mom was a hairdresser, and the accused had gone a couple of times to the victim's mother's hair salon to get his hair done. So they met at No Sorry, where the accused told the victim, "I'll buy you some fish and chips. Let's go to Samambula." So they proceeded to go to Samambula, where he proceeds to take her to the Gospel High School bus stop. I think everybody here knows. If you're from Fiji, you know the hotspot. One of them is the Gospel High School. You always see people loitering around there. Where he proceeds to sell her to one random person walking past. And that's how this started. For the next 4 days, he basically kept her in his care. After he sold her for the first time, he threw her money. And she found this as a way to make money. Remember, impoverished people, to us, seeing a $50 note or a $100 note, it's not a big deal. But to somebody who has to count pennies to go to school, this was her way out to make money for herself, and she didn't need to depend on anyone. Right? That's the psychological break that these people use to get you to do what they want. And so she, for the next 3 days, she was undertaking, she had gone to the streets and sold herself under the supervision of Josephatha Werelangi. On, I think, the 5th night or the 4th night, the accused had gone clubbing and left her outside, and that's when a police officer questioned her randomly. Because she looked young, the police officer walked up, "Why are you here? What are you doing?" And I think that police officer saved this girl. He took her to the station. He didn't realize, speaking to the police officer, he said, "I didn't realize what kind of case this was. It was just an underage girl loitering around the nightclub areas, and I just started to talk to her and I took her to the station." Once he took her to the station, everything came out, right? And that was in 2015. It took 3 years for the police to finalize this investigation. And this is not a complicated, this is not one of the most complicated human trafficking cases. It was domestic trafficking. It took 3 years for the police to finally send the file and conclude investigations. And that's when the DMV's office had charged. Right. I'm going to talk to you about how important the media is in play, because remember these victims, they go through trial by media, and they also go through trial with a proper judge and assessment, right? And so as a media platform, you have so much power in this room, so much informative power. And you can either inspire people to come up and tell their stories about trafficking, or you can destroy it. And I think this is one of the cases that it was destroyed. So these were the newspaper articles in relation to the child victim, right? In terms of this case. So by trial by the public, they say he was not guilty, right? It was a kind act that backfired because he was taking care of a child that no one else wanted. Right, the child said, yes, she wasn't forced to travel with him. Of course, it was consensual on her part, but she was being manipulated. But the media didn't see it that way, right? She said she was afraid of going home, and they capitalized that to say that, what perception is the media building in terms of this? And if you were a traffic victim, after looking at what is written in the media, would you want to come up with your story? If you see this in the paper, would you want to come out and say, there's no information, right? These stories are out there, but there's no information on the media. Okay, if I am a victim, where can I go? What are the services available to me, right? What am I going to go through? Am I going to go through the same thing as what this person is going through? Because I don't want that. Her name may be suppressed, but everyone is talking about it. Everyone is tweeting about it, right? The media, the online forum and the media space is harsh. And imagine that on a child that's underage. She's a teenager, so she can read and she can understand what's happening. But these kind of articles, she put I spoke to the victim. She said, leave it, it's my fault. I put myself in that situation, and it broke my heart because these are the articles coming out at that time. And when we got a conviction, this was it. This was the only article out there when we got the conviction. An informative article just to say, he's found guilty, that's how many years he's doing in prison, full stop. No investigative journalism. I don't mean to insult the journalism forum, but you need to know, as Mr. Shailendra said, you play an important role. Right? Not a lot of people are privileged to sit in this room and come to the table and talk about human trafficking issues. Everyone reads the Fiji Times, the Fiji Sun, the Nalalikai, and all of the newspapers, right? Everyone's online reading FBC News because that's the first point of contact people look to for news, right? And so we need to hold the journalism forum at a higher standard than any other forum, because what you say, what you write about in the media impacts. The 2021 national survey, I think undertaken by UNODC and the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, they say there's 5,000 victims of human trafficking. Question mark, why are there no prosecutions? Why are the victims not speaking out? And why are the police not investigating? And those questions are interrelated, right? There are no prosecutions because the police are not bringing the files to them. The police are not investigating because the victims are not speaking out. And maybe the victims are not speaking out because they don't see any prosecutions, right? Everyone has this thing, oh, if you go to the police station, they will not help. If you go and give your statement to the police, that's it. What happens to it, we don't know, right? There's a lot of misconceptions in regards to what happens, but we need to create spaces where these victims feel comfortable to speak about what happened to them. And bearing in mind, what happened to them is not the easiest thing to speak about. We can't go and say, if it happened to you, why can't you tell us, right? That's like telling a normal person, why don't you come and explain to me how you had sex on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday? Or how come you come and explain to me how you were degraded as a human being to do X, Y, and Z, right? These are not the easiest things for these victims to come and talk about. And so maybe there's a lot of work to be done, but we need to create safe spaces for these people to come about. And I think the media, in terms of investigative reporting, information reporting, like where can these people go? What happens to a case once you've told police about it? What can you do about it? Well, I'm in a room full of journalists. I'm going to leave this question for you. You're doing something about it now by actually acknowledging that the problem is here, and we're sitting in this room talking about it, right? That's what I say, that is a big step. What the information you gain from this forum, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to keep it with you? Are you going to tell a friend? Are you going to write about it? That is the important part. And you may not think that you're making waves, but it's these small steps that we can create bigger waves together.
Okay, so let's go to the next speaker. Actually, there's two who will be sharing the presentation from International Organization of Migration, better known as IOM in the region. Okay, the first speaker will be Venina Niumataiwalu. Is a project coordinator at IOM in Fiji. She's a passionate development worker with over 10 years experience working across government, civil society, regional and international organizations in the area of youth development, private sector development, gender equality, anti-corruption, migration governance, countering trafficking and migrant protection and assistance.
Before I go into the heart of the matter, I'd always like to talk a bit about us, International Organization for Migration. And this is because we are fairly new entrants into the UN family here in Fiji. And so globally, we were established in 1951, as you can see on the slide, as the leading intergovernmental organization in the field of migration. 175 member states, 8 states holding observer status, and offices in around 100 countries. We work primarily in the area of promoting and facilitating safe and humane migration, and we do this by assisting and building the capacities of our member countries, government agencies, intergovernmental agencies, and also civil society agencies. In terms of labor mobility in the Pacific, we all know that there are countries in the Pacific that are currently participating in the seasonal workers program, both in Australia and New Zealand. And we know that the lack of capacity and the skill shortages in both New Zealand and Australia has allowed for these bilateral agreements to take place between the Pacific Island countries and Australia and New Zealand, making that perfect condition for seasonal labor migration scheme that we currently have. Quite apart from that, it is also migration within the Pacific Island country. That this is where we have human mobility and labor mobility within Pacific Island countries, particularly in key sectors, key areas such as in education, health sectors, and you can see indications teaching the mass migration of nurses and doctors and teachers even to the other Pacific Island countries, speaking volumes on labor migration. On the slide, as you can see, there are positive impacts and also negative impacts of labor mobility. Positive impact being the amount of remittances that the island countries are now receiving because we have migrant workers in Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, that are sending money back, helping and assisting our families back home in terms of meeting the basic necessities daily. We have skills, knowledge, and technological transfer that is counted as a benefit of labor mobility, because what we have now is our people coming back to the Pacific Island countries with the skills and the knowledge that they've acquired from being employed abroad, and they're sharing this back home. Technology transfer, of course, with the rise in technology, you have digital exchange that is now happening as some of the positive impacts of labor mobility. And you have the negative impacts that we all can see daily, even on social media platforms. You have a gendered impact on women. If you were in the Pacific, at the Pacific update for the past 2 or 3 days, you'd hear about the gendered impact of labor mobility on women and how this seasonal migration occurring in communities that are now predominantly women-led. So you have women mothers making the shift at family unit. You have women who are now taking on double the responsibility of being the family caretaker and the key decision making. Of course, we have family separation. Of course, with this labor mobility, a lot of emerging issues on family separations, extramarital affairs. These are some of the social impacts that cannot be ignored because this is a glaring lack of safety nets, unlawful deductions. These are some of the issues that our workers are facing when they go across. Arrears in payment of wages. We have cases of sexual exploitation and trafficking. Now, IOM did a Pacific migration common country analysis where we did desktop reviews and also keep an interview across Pacific in the area of migration and development, one of which was labor migration or labor mobility. Now, the Pacific migration common country analysis then shaped the Pacific strategy, which guides our activities and projects here in the Pacific. So those are some of the key recommendations that you can see on the slide. There are 7 key recommendations, particularly working with on labor mobility, mainly to do with labor migration governance. So we're talking about the framework, the policies at national level and at regional level on how do we regulate, how do we manage these labor migration schemes better at both regional and national level. Number 2 there, you can see improving existing temporary and seasonal labor schemes, moving to new destination countries and into key new occupational areas. As I mentioned before, right now with the government of Australia, New Zealand, are there any opportunities for Pacific Island countries to consider moving into typically non-traditional destination countries such as Japan, in the Asian countries, Europe, to name a few. There's a need to increase studies around understanding the social impact of migration at community level and at all levels, including collecting consistent labor migration data to ensure evidence-based in policy making. We do acknowledge that there's a serious lack of data at all levels, and for most of the issues that we have here in the Pacific, one of which is labor mobility. So there's a typical lack of labor mobility information system within the country to enable us to say, okay, these skill shortages that we now have in the Pacific, what do we need? And how do we then address these skill shortages that are arising because of this labor mobility? So that's the wider discussion that's happening at regional and also at national level. Increasing inter-labor migration and localizing selected positions. And in number 7, you see the improving women's participation in labor mobility scheme, primarily because the current scheme is predominantly male. And so how do we then increase women's participation in the labor mobility schemes, and what steps do we then need to introduce, or Australia and New Zealand can maybe open to us to allow greater women's participation in this. So in terms of the work that IOM does on labor mobility, as you can see on the slide, we have pillar 2 of the IOM Pacific strategy. There are 4 pillars in general. I'm sorry, back to the first slide. But pillar 2 is particularly on labor mobility development, and then on objective to labor migrants and their community benefit from effective and well-managed mobility for human development. When we look at the programs that we currently have, we're focusing on 2 parts. First, how do we strengthen and build the capacities of our Pacific migrants that are going abroad, not only in the seasonal worker scheme, but in labor mobility in general, in a broader sense. And then the other outcome that we would like to work on, or we're looking into, is how do we strengthen policy and legislation and frameworks at regional and national level in terms of labor mobility. So those are two things that two areas of focus that we can say IOM is working in terms of the Pacific. Remember earlier I had talked about the social impact of labor mobility, particularly in communities and families. So what we noticed that there was a need to have programs and projects that are targeting the very basic unit of communities and just basically preparing this family for that months and years of separation, and how do families deal with and manage that separation when their spouses are abroad under this work. So that's the family journey, equipping families for the benefits of labor mobility, and that's currently in Vanuatu. We have the family ready and reintegration, supporting families to maintain healthy relationship after labor mobility, and basically talking about reintegration when they come back to their countries of origin, to the Pacific. When they come back to us, how well do they reintegrate back into their community? How well do they, that component, managing the dynamics of their family, things like that provide the basis for labor mobility issues in general. And we have, to address the regional and the national frameworks, those two other projects on enhancing labor mobility governance in the Pacific, labor mobility for sustainable development and climate change resilience. And this is done in partnership with ILO. And in this particular project, they look at how that government, Pacific Island countries, can benefit from fair and humane migration in terms of this labor mobility. In terms of the donors, we have the IAM Development Funds, the GFAP, and also the UN Women who've been supporting us in terms of the labor mobility project that we have. At the moment, there's this work, body of work around proposed regional labor mobility strategy, which is being spearheaded by the Pacific Islands Forum. The work started in 2020. As you can see, of course, labor mobility in the standing agenda at the Forum Trade Ministers meeting. And in 2021, PIPS did a comprehensive assessment of the Pacific labor mobility across the countries and their member countries. And then in 2023, right now, in partnership with IOM, we're trying to then work on the recommendations of a comprehensive assessment, and then compile or put together a regional strategy on labor mobility to improve access to labor mobility initiatives, greater protection for migrants, enhance reintegration support, returning migrants, and of course, on how best to increase the participation of women. And how do we encourage a stronger regional dialogue on labor mobility challenges. The linkages between labor migration and trafficking in persons, I'm sure, have been explained by Shirley and of course earlier by Dr. Mila. We can see that at the outset, migrant workers are extremely vulnerable to trafficking in persons, smuggling, and modern slavery. Shirley had mentioned earlier some of the reasons why migrant workers are vulnerable, because of they are out of their country, there's language barrier, and of course if they don't understand the contract, and if they don't understand, the country that they're working, that they're going into, and the jobs they will be doing, and small things like their salary, accommodation. Imagine going to a new country and going through all of that. And this is why migrant workers have 3 times higher chances of falling into forced labor than any other worker. So across the Pacific, there's this need for systematic vulnerability screening and support, regardless of the migrant's legal status. And what we mean by that is that we need to put in place, as you can see, Shirley mentioned earlier on, why are we not having reported cases, given the number that was indicated by UNODC? One of the key reasons might be that lack of screening assessments in place and support, even with the legal and prosecution and enforcement awareness. These are key things that we need in place in order to successfully counter trafficking in general and to look at a number of cases. One of the key reasons too that Dr. Miller had raised is there's just lack of data generally across the board, particularly in human trafficking. As the data in terms of cases that are successfully prosecuted depends on how best we are identifying victims and taking them through right through to prosecution. In terms of the study that we did, now IOM in 2021 did a study on trafficking, trends of trafficking in Fiji. I'm just going to skip, and then that study we intended to see focus on determining the characteristics and risk factors for adults and children in Fiji in particular. Under this study, IOM had conducted 50 semi-structured interviews along with key persons interviews to do the study. According to the research and according to the interviews that were conducted, were through social media, telephone, and job advertisement. Of course, children being trafficked for sexual exploitation, adults, mainly men, trafficked for forced labor. And in terms of the sectors that this takes place in, it's usually the logging, farming, the fishery sector, and of course the hotels. So characteristics of Fijians trafficked abroad. Fijians have been exploited in other Pacific countries as well as Australia, New Zealand for forced labor or exploitation. We have cases of Fijian adults in destination countries such as Tonga, and then also Fijians being trafficked to as far as Egypt. In one of the latest cases that we received. In terms of other foreigners being trafficked to Fiji, foreigners, I'm glad that Shelley had highlighted earlier in terms of the foreigners trafficked into the sex, fishing, and construction sectors, of some of the cases that Shelley had highlighted. So where is it happening? Of course, in the construction, agriculture, hospitality industry, then you have associated with trafficking certain expenses. So you have recruiters, taxi drivers, small but very loose network, but there's existing network according to the study. And in terms of motivations, traffickers, of course, are always motivated by financial motivation. In terms of the gaps and challenges that the study identified, the study was done in the midst of COVID. So it negatively affected all aspects of Fiji's response to trafficking in person. Legislation challenges, just as Shelley had talked about earlier, how some of the definitions were not included in the current legislation that we have, data challenges in terms of how we just don't have the data for trafficking in Fiji in general. What you have, if you go to the human trafficking unit, is a very small collection of data, small data that they collected manually according to the cases that they've received. So, few key recommendations that we're now working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Home Affairs to address, including civil societies as well. There's the recommendations that you can see in terms of legislation review, prevention measures that we can do collectively, victim identification. We're working with Ministry of Home Affairs to try and put together victim identification and screening process that agencies, law enforcement agencies, including CSOs, and all countering trafficking actors can use in terms of reporting, identifying, and screening possible victims of trafficking. On this slide is basically an outcome of what we did, what we're currently doing with regards to trafficking across the Pacific. We're basically working with Pacific Island countries to build their capacity to better address trafficking in general in terms of legislation review. And of course, we're also working from the other spectrum in terms of migrant protection and assistance on how to put in place national referral mechanisms. And we've done this in Tonga, Vanuatu, and Fiji. national referral mechanisms that can assist victims of trafficking, that is victim centric, that is also working towards protecting the rights of victims.
So we'll go to the next speaker, Papias Alcordo, who is from the Philippines. She has worked as a Filipino overseas worker, or what it's called OFW, for over 16 years in Kuwait and Singapore. She wrote a book of non-fiction short stories. This book, which documents short stories, stories of Filipino migrant workers, written as short stories, reflecting their experiences while working in Singapore and also in many other countries. She was invited to talk about it at the Global Media Forum in Bonn, Germany in 2010. She is now back in the Philippines, doing a business, living in the hometown of Davao in the Philippines, with her son, who is doing a degree in criminology, very much related to this field. Over to you.
My talk is based on my book, which was published about 10 years ago. Dr. Shailendra showed you this one, and it reflects my own experience. And as an overseas Filipino worker, or we are known as a OFW and my co-OFW in Asia and Middle East. Everyone has got different experiences. Some of them are lucky and become a happy employee, and some of them are unlucky to have unkind employers. I have written this book, The Path to Remittance, because I wanted to bring the attention to both Filipinos and foreigners. Some of the hidden issue of the OFW experience. Many don't like to talk about, so I decided to write some short story. This is real story without using the real name, so that this issue could be brought to the open. Again, thanks to Dr. Shailendra, who has been a guide to me through this project. I think I have been able to come out with a book which is readable. I'm going to share with you some of the stories. There are three main issues which I wanted to bring out through the book. First, high replacement fees and the government agent charges OFW. Second, demand by family for money and money. More money. Third, unwanted pregnancy, which forced the girls to go overseas to work. Many of us as an OFW in Singapore, but not there anymore. Some of us married to different nationalities, so we broke up. And now I live in the Philippines permanently with my son. So I have been discussing this problem for a long time. We are hoping some could help us to solve this problem. And I wrote this book to speak out about this problem because this is unfair. Agency earn a lot of money and they have such a nice job. They hardly do anything for us, while their applicants work from 6 a.m. till 12 midnight, and they get no salary for the first 7 to 8 months. Why? Because the agency takes that money from the OFW. It's been paid for finding us a job, and knowingly the OFW signed into a slavery contract in this 21st century. I understand last month you marked the Garment Day here, marking the arrival of Indian in the indentured labor of Fiji over a century ago. They had signed similar agreement with the British colonial sugar plantation owners. Coming back to the labor recruiting agency, they take this money when they are overseas in the Philippines before you leave. An agency will ask you to cash out money. Some agency ask for 10 peso, some 10 15,000 pesos, and some is about 20,000 peso, which is about $230. This is fill out the forms, give you a passport and a ticket to go abroad. You take all this money, but if the applicant get into trouble, agency won't help the OFW. We put on blame on the applicant. Some agency will help, but they charge additional 1 month salary deduction. So one of my stories is about Randy, a school teacher who went to Saudi Arabia to work as a driver. When his employer accused him of having an affair with the Sri Lankan maid and assaulted him, he ran away. And the agency would not help him even to get back home. So what we do, we contributed cash to him to buy the ticket. So he had to stay at the shelter run by the Philippines embassy for almost 5 months. He finally returned with no pay, given for 2 months. He worked there, the agent, no pay. The agent did not return any money. The fees he paid them to find him a foreign job. This is a common story, especially if you go to the Arab countries. So even in Singapore, many maids have problem with agent. In fact, I met one lady in the maid agency. She has transfer or changed employer within a year. She didn't get a salary for a year. It all went to the agency because she kept on transferring. So if you transfer, additional 1 month. Then if you don't like your employer, you want to transfer again, additional 1 month of your salary. So it become 1 year, she has no salary. She belonged to unlucky applicants. We pity her, but how can I help her for telling me the story? Just to buy her a packet of biscuit and some coffee. In one coffee and some noodles, because the food the agency gave them while looking for a new employer was not enough for them, and also the charge for the food and even to stay, daily stay for about $10 a day. So their second point, the OFW family are very happy and proud of their family member to go out of the Philippines or their country, thinking that going to work abroad very easy and will get a salary, high salary. So you have a lot of money. So, but this is not true. Most of the friends in Singapore used always complain about their mother, father, sometimes their relatives or friends, even the cousin, asking for money always, even not necessary their party or their birthday. So one of the friends asked me, also some payment like water bill, electrical bill, and others. One of my friends in Singapore was very upset because she just sent money this week. Then after a week, she received a message again from the mother that asking for money to pay the electric bill. So my friend is crying to me and telling me that, oh, my mother is asking money again, and now what to do? I don't have money. I said, I have money, so I can lend you some. But this is the problem of the OFW and the family. So the third point, unwanted pregnancy, also one of the reasons why Filipino women are forced to go and work overseas, especially as a housemaid, because the Catholic Church teaching say not to use contraceptive methods, that is a sin. So many girls who have boyfriends when at high school or university get pregnant when they don't want to, because they have already got money, many children. Some family have 4 or even more than that. They can abort also because it is a violation against the law. Father is just a tricycle driver. Income is not enough to support for the family needs. So the girl leave the baby with the mother or elder sister or even the cousin and then goes to overseas to work. The money, many housemaids send back not only support the children and the guardian, but whole families sometimes. When they are married, even the husband, mistress sometimes, or his gambling or alcohol habit. So the third are a number of stories which reflect this problem, and a few are very depressing. Dr. Shailendra told me that it depressed him editing the stories. So I hope by writing this book, the media would take up and report about this issue. When I launched this book in Manila about 10 years ago, I was interviewed in one of the main current affairs shows called ANC. When I was relating some of the stories, the host looked surprised. He said, "This is depressing." I thought it was their role to tell these stories. All what the report is how much remittances we send back home and how it is helping the family economy. Occasionally, they will report about how Filipino women are cruelly treated overseas, especially in the Arab countries. When someone is killed and her body is brought back home. At the moment, there is a big dispute between the government of Kuwait and the Philippines because the Kuwait government has stopped giving visa to Filipino. Their government there is over 190,000 Filipino women working there as a housemaid. Under Philippines law, the government has to set up a shelter to house Filipino workers who stay there, employer because of abuse. In countries where large number of Filipinos work in Kuwait, government wants the Philippines embassy to close the shelter. There were over 450 Filipino are sheltered there. Between 2018 and this year, 4 Filipino women were murdered. They're all working as a housewife. Media should not always talk about how much remittances we send home. They must look at the suffering we have to send this money back. How people exploit us both in the Philippines and overseas. Why our government not doing enough to stop this? Every time the president wants to change laws, so allow contraception available, especially to women at the government cost, to pick up fight with the bishop father. Rather than reporting about the fight, media should look at how this could stop unwanted pregnancy and stop Filipino women going overseas to work, leaving families behind. From what I gathered today, the Pacific region about the touch into this labor explore industry. So I hope the media here will be able to come up with some plan to improve reporting of migrant labor issue from the migrating laborers perspective. In the Philippines, reporting from the OFW perspective is sadly lacking. Thank you very much again for inviting me here to speak to this big people. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Papias, for the presentation. Now, we have only male speaker today.
So you must have noticed me taking notes furiously. That was really interesting presentations, each and every one of them, and really eye-opening as well. So I've lived in Fiji all my life, and I thought I know the region pretty well. And I knew there were some problems with, human trafficking and all that. but I did not know the full extent of the problem. So even I think even today after this presentation, we still don't know the full extent of the problem. What is encouraging is that there's an army of people working to address the issues at stake. And that also tells us how serious the problem is. And it might even get more serious because of the trends we are seeing in labor migration from Fiji to Australia, New Zealand, and other countries. Now we are thinking that these are developed countries and that our laborers are going out there for a better future, right? To some extent, yes, that is true, but there's also a lot of exploitation that is going on. So I'll just quickly speak of my notes. So as I would say, it was an eye-opening presentation and gave us a good understanding of the problem and its complexities, as well as its cruelties. From the presentation, we can see it is as organized and sophisticated as it is ruthless, evil, and pervasive. Right? I don't think that's an exaggeration to describe it as ruthless and evil. I think that is really the situation from the presentations we have had. We had about a 59% decrease in Asia Pacific, which would seem to be good news, but the Pacific is lumped with Asia as usual. What this means, it doesn't help us to assess our situation fully. But based on the presentations, it is safe to assume that the Pacific is vulnerable because we also have high unemployment, low incomes, and desperate people. A lot of desperate people in the Pacific. We are portrayed as a paradise, but those of us who live here, we know that the reality is something else. It is a paradise, but not for everyone. There are a lot of Pacific Islanders who are struggling on a daily basis. Okay, now what was also really interesting and eye-opening was that, we always focus about our laborers going overseas and getting exploited in these countries. What was eye-opening for me was that these cases are happening right under our noses, and we were not even aware, right? At least not fully aware of the extent of the problem and the suffering as well. So the question then is, how are we as a region equipped to deal with what could be a looming problem about to get worse due to increases in labor mobility in our region? The media has a really important role to play. This came out very clearly in all the presentations. We heard that the victims rely on self. We only know of the situation because the victims went and reported what was happening. It seems when I was looking at how awareness is created and how these cases come to light, the media was not represented in a major way. So that's one issue that we probably need to address. Okay, now the message for the media, based on today's presentation, I would say is that this is a looming problem and a major human rights and public interest issue. And this is why we as the media, we need to take interest. Besides coverage of the bread and butter issues like politics, sports, and business, we should also focus on human trafficking, as we heard today. We have a major role in investigating and exposing any criminal activity in these human migration labor schemes. Now, because we are so busy, there are so many competing demands. Maybe that is why this issue is being neglected. However, in some cases, the research is done and the information is already available. We don't have to do much work. There are a lot of reports out there based on the presentations that we have seen today. What we can do, we can just report these reports that are already available in our publications. We had the media being criticized, which is quite fair, I believe. However, the onus is also on the organizations working in these areas to also up their game as far as media communications is concerned. There are a lot of competing demands on the media's time and space. Right? So you have to also compete for the media's time and space. There's so many things to cover. So unless you also make an effort, chances are you will fall through the cracks. So these organizations, I would urge should also invest in a media and communications department so that whatever research and work you are doing reaches out to the media in the kind of language that is, easily understandable by the media and the public at large. One of the really compelling things I found about today's presentation was the individual cases. There seems to be a lot of attention paid to, these crime syndicates, but there are also individuals and families that are exploiting the situation. I don't think we should ignore the individual cases because the suffering is just as great, whether it's one person, more than one person. So the domestic workers, for example, right, who are enslaved, beaten, sexually exploited, and so forth. We should pay attention to such cases as well. Media can also cover any cases that appear in court, right? Court cases don't take too much time to report. If you don't have time to cover, do a major investigation, you can go to court. Any cases that are heard in court should get maximum coverage because I believe the publicity serves two main purposes. The first is it creates awareness about the problem. And the second is that it acts as a deterrent, right? When would-be offenders read about these cases, they are discouraged. And also those who are victims, they can come forward, they are more encouraged to come forward and report about their situation.
Also, I must add to what Shailendra said, when we organized this, Shailendra and me had a discussion. The material which are presented here, I'll be asking the speakers to provide me a transcript if you can. We hope to publish something especially for use as a resource for use by the journalism students. Maybe next semester we will have a lecture on this issue so that this information which was presented here, we hope to put it together as a resource for the students.